What was the most disturbing thing you saw in person? Nurse. Trauma code on a middle-aged gentleman who wrecked his car. Basically dead on arrival and didn't make it. The ambulance that dropped him off had to do a speed clean of the bloody gurney to rush out to another call immediately. 30 minutes later, it brings in an old lady who had fallen at home. She kept saying she can't get a hold of her son, and he was supposed to take her to the hospital. Turns out, her son was the one who wrecked his car on his way to take his mom to the hospital, and she was brought in on the same gurney that her dead son was just laying on moments earlier. That was a gut punch having to tell her the bad news. This was in a rural community with limited ambulance service. Medical student. On one of my M rotations, we had a young woman in her late teens or early 20s come in, cardiac arrest, suspected drug overdose, but unresponsive to Narcan. We worked on her for 40 minutes. She had been down for 20-40 minutes prior to arrival. We ended up calling the code. I go to see my next patient. Happens to be a man in his late teens or early 20s. He mentioned that he saw his girlfriend collapse and that he's pretty sure she's at our ed. I ask her name. She was the cardiac arrest patient from earlier. Once as a kid I was home alone, my mom, and she fell. I called my dad's office and said mom fell and isn't moving. His office was about a 15-minute drive away. I swear I hung up that phone and walked into the living room to see my dad running up the front walk. To this day, I don't know how he got home so fast, but reading this, I'm grateful he made it safely. I lived with a friend that was a bit of an animal hoarder. She worked in a vet clinic, was a licensed animal rehabber, and chairperson of a wildlife sanctuary. There were creatures in cages everywhere, everything from otters to raccoons running around the house. Because some were too disabled to be released into the wild, so they turned into pets. It was a 24-hour job keeping all the cages clean, and it was so overwhelming. Animal rescue is very emotionally painful. She and I and many other rehabbers I've known had issues with alcohol and painters. I'm somewhat of a documented hoarder. My mom and dad are the same way. It used to be much worse. I live in a one-bedroom apartment. In 2017, I had to hard reset the mess at the behest of our property manager, who harasses me for multiple reasons anyway. So it got a real scrub down at that point, and it was, I guess, fine. Then I told the landlord, look, we both know I'm not going to clean anything. Why don't I just have a service come in monthly? So yeah, I have a cleaning dude come clean or sanitize every month. I was unbothered by it either way, mostly, but I don't like when people rearrange my life and hassle me. I have severe bipolar disorder and autism, and I choose to live by myself. Do hoarders understand that their places are abnormally dirty, or do they think it is a completely normal living situation? I have always wondered this when I have heard of people being invited into homes with dead animals and stacks of trash. My dad's a hoarder, and everyone in the family knows how disgusting it is in the house, but after years of telling him to throw away his hoard in my early teens, you just give up. The arguments just become meaningless, and everyone becomes numb to the house. If you ever try to sort anything, it gets to the end of the day, and nothing's changed. My plan was just to get out as soon as I could, and I'm at uni now. It breaks you to give up on them, but for my own mental health, I had to let him go so he can work on it himself. I can't speak as a hoarder, but when my depression gets really bad, things get messy. When it happens, I know it's messy, it's embarrassing, I hate it, I want to tidy, but I'm so depressed it doesn't happen as I'm not a functioning human at this point. It's embarrassing to talk about, but so many people with depression or other mental health issues struggle with that kind of thing. But it's not discussed and almost taboo to do so. It should be talked about more so people understand it more, and so people are more willing to get help and support. I could see how people end up hoarding or in a messy house. Mental health warps your brain, and I'd imagine the majority are aware things are abnormal. You'd maybe get one or two who don't see it. I definitely struggle with throwing things away too, as I hate wasting things, but it's not to a point where anyone would notice. TBH, and I do rarely buy new stuff. I grew up in my mom's hoard and truthfully no, didn't understand that it was hoarding until high school, because it wasn't as bad as it was on TV shows, and all my friends had messy homes. I thought we were also just messy. I was the only person living there out of 6 that cared a little bit and tried to keep it clean. When I moved out, it got much worse, but they're so used to it. They go nose blind too, and my stepdad has insisted their house doesn't smell when it's the only thing I can focus on when I visit. It's very sad because when you live within the horde, it seems normal and homey, and you can look past it sometimes. But once I started to realize what I was living in, it scared me. My maternal grandmother was a hoarder. My uncles and dad weren't allowed to have friends over growing up. She didn't regret the state of the house. She just knew it would get them judged or worse, so nobody was allowed to see it but family. One of my uncles is now oct. My dad is hoarder light, never throws anything away and rarely cleans, but you can see the floor. My other uncle hoards belongings. Every square inch of wall has a poster on it, bookshelves floor to ceiling, but is a neat freak. He said to me the other day, home is for family. I was like, yeah, I feel you. And he said, no, home is only for family. I have never had a friend over to my house. As a 40-year-old man, had never had a friend over. Become home is for family only. Damn. Hijacking this because I need some help, and this thread is exactly my situation. My mom is a hoarder. She hoards copious amounts of cardboard and garbage. She went on a month-long vacation after my dad died, and I'm cleaning our house out from top to bottom. It's been 2 weeks, and I'm only halfway done. But what do I say to her when she gets back? So many stories here are people saying they relapse, or they break down and cut ties and isolate. I really hope someone has some anecdotal story about how after they cleared out the hoard they did a few things, or said a few things to keep them away from relapsing. I'm sorry for making this personal. I just need some help. When I was about 9 years old, our family was staying at a campground on a river in northern Michigan. A 2-year-old boy had wandered off and was missing. The entire park was looking for him. After about 2 hours with no luck, some of us began looking in the water at the ends of the docks nearby. When I dove down in about 4 of water, found him floating just off the bottom of the river. I pulled him to the surface and shouted for help. The EMTs made an effort to resuscitate him, to no avail. As horrible as that was, the thing that I will never forget was the sound his mother made when I carried him ashore. I still enjoy boating and swimming, but I have a very healthy respect for the water. In 6th grade, my girlfriend got decapitated in a car accident. I lived in a subdivision about 10 miles outside of town. It was mostly farm country around there, and although they weren't a lot of roads, they were access roads from some of the farms. Most of the access roads from the farms were lower than the main road. I'd heard that some of the older kids would drive out on the farm roads and then try to jump the main road. My girlfriend's dad was driving her home from a Girl Scout meeting and somebody was drunk and trying to jump the road. They had no headlights on. Because they had the radio on and were singing, they didn't hear anything until her dad saw a car airborne flying at their car. He ducked down and tried to grab his daughter and pull her down. But as he was reaching for her, the car hit theirs at the window level, tearing the roof off and decapitating her. Her father was also knocked unconscious. It was a miracle that he was able to respond quick enough to save himself, but unfortunately not his daughter. The drunk driver only suffered 2 broken wrists. Her father regained consciousness in the hospital to find out that not only had his daughter not survived, she had been decapitated. Witnessed a bad car wreck one time. This lady and her son had their car totally flipped. She ended up dragging him out of the wreckage, and while he was clearly already quite dead, she was in such a state of shock that she just kept looking for his missing shoe. The image plays in the back of my mind constantly. Her carrying this bloody, limp boy in her arms, stumbling around trying to ask all of us if we knew where his shoe was because he can't be out here without his shoes on. In between asking, she'd let out these inhuman wails, pressing her face against him and reassuring him that it'd be alright cause mama had him. I have my own son now, and I think about that woman so much. I know the sound. It really does live with you forever. My neighbor's son was like 5 and ran out in the street in front of a Jeep. His mother saw it hit him as she was walking out the door. We happened to be outside at the time. The shriek this woman made was bone-chilling. Our other neighbor was a cop, so he immediately started compressions and called it in. Luckily, the boy lived and is fine now, but the sheer terror and pain of that mother's scream I'll never forget. I witnessed a family come into the ER and be told their father passed in the ambulance on the way there. Their noises I won't forget. All four of them broke down in immediately shock. The man's wife in particular made a crying bellow that made me want to run out of the hospital. I also was the person with my grandmother when she finally passed after a long bedridden battle and witnessed the life leave her. I made a crying or croaking I did not know I was capable of. Shock causes involuntary reactions in the form noises that are unlike any other human experience. They rock you to your core. You don't forget them. They change you forever just a tiny bit each time. I can relate to how that mom's scream must have felt. When I worked in TV news, I responded to an accident not far from our station. I happened to be one of the first people there. I get out of our news truck, grab my camera, and begin walking over. I come around the side of this truck, and there's a teenage boy hanging lifelessly out of the driver's door. I yell to him, but he isn't responding, so I call 911. A couple minutes go by and some other cars stop. Then I hear the most awful wail ever heard from across the road. A woman had gotten out of an SUV and was grabbing her hair and just screaming. I knew it was his mom without even asking. It turns out this 15-year-old boy was learning to drive and had been trying to make a turn across a 2-lane highway when he got T-boned by a semi-truck. The woman later confirmed to be his mom had been following him from a nearby town, but had gotten caught at a light. When she came over the hill to the highway turn, the first thing she saw was him hanging there. It's been almost 15 years, and I'll never forget her scream. Somewhat off topic, and favorite is the wrong word, but I don't know how to word this properly. But your second to last sentence encapsulates why my favorite part of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire is when Amos Diggory first sees Cedric's body. Jeff Rawle, the actor who played him, I had to look it up, captured that sound of pure no of a parent in that situation. The anger, the regret, the sadness, all the emotions that get rolled into a sound that means more than any words. It's not that I enjoy the moment as much as I respect how well done it is. Riding a bike to primary school when I saw a red-headed girl from a different primary school cross a dangerous road. She immediately got hit by a yellow TCV and landed face up in quite a tranquil pose with her red hair perfectly spread out on the asphalt. As I rode closer and closer, her hair took on a brilliant shine and appeared to grow longer and longer. Took a while to understand it was blood. Girl went into coma for a while. Never heard if she made it because I was a child and shielded from that news. Was at a pool party at the end of 2020. I didn't know anyone there except for the host. So while I was swimming, one of the guys bumped against me under the water. I turned to look at him, and he was sort of floating under the surface. He seemed calm, and I quickly got distracted by the host asking me a question. Anyway, they noticed one of the guys had gone missing, and I had no clue who or what this guy looked like. But I had this aching feeling of dread and kept thinking about the pool. But when we checked, the water was cloudy and seemed empty. We found his clothes and phone, but nobody else seemed too panicked. But as the day went on, everyone got more nervous and we couldn't even keep looking because a massive storm rolled over suddenly. Eventually, after it got dark, a few of us got ready to leave, walking to our cars when someone spotted a dark shadow in the pool. I'll never forget the sound of people screaming, "We found him," and how he looked as his friends pulled him out of the pool and put him in the car to get to the hospital. But he was obviously dead and had been in there for hours. I felt sick because nobody knew how to contact his family. This poor man was 28 years old. But what scarred me the most was his funeral. It was packed full, and his family were wailing so loud some of them had to leave the room. I felt so guilty, like I should have known and stopped it. When I spoke to one of the other girls, she said she had also seen him, but he wasn't struggling and actually looked like he was just swimming by. Autopsy said he hit his head and got a concussion. We'd all been drinking and smoking by the pool. I became morbidly obsessed with trying to understand how drowning could even happen. In hindsight, I wish I knew and others that people drowning do not always look like they're struggling, and being intoxicated by a body of water can be detrimental. Thankfully, I haven't seen much horrors in person. All my proper nightmare fuel is from being an edgy high schooler on 4chan. The worst thing I saw in person though was when a stray cat we had been feeding and made a home for. No tenure in the area, no shelters would take him. We couldn't take him another in, etc. Finally turned up after vanishing for a few days. I went out to the back porch to empty a pan of grease and heard a very disturbing sounding gurgling pitiful meow behind me. I turned around, and there's Tommy Bird jaw out of place, missing an eye. The other eye fully scabbed over and pooped out of the socket swelled to the size of my fist almost. Head and face caked in dried blood. Looked like he should have been dead already, but the poor thing was still moving. I said his name in shock, and he perked up immensely. I don't think he was 100% who he had approached given his sight challenges, and started meowing more. I pet him some because he clearly wanted pets and comfort, and then tried to rapidly get him some wet food and water, and shaking and panicking which quickly turned into a proper panic attack till I got my meds in me. He couldn't eat or drink. The poor thing kept trying to. He was clearly both hungry and thirsty, but his jaw was making it impossible to do either, and he kept trying and making pain sounds while failing, so I had to take the food and water back. While holding and comforting him, and sobbing and freaking out, I started calling vet after vet looking for the closest place I could take him immediately without any weight to get put down. I didn't want him to suffer. Eventually found a place that could take him in 45 minutes. And was right in town, so I put him in a carrier. Despite being an unneutered stray, he did not fight me at all on getting into a carrier. He was so trusting, and had even come back to us after his injuries, and off we went. This got too long, so I'ma summarize the rest. Vet saw how amazingly loving and friendly he was even as a stray, and heavily injured and in pain, purring and leaning into pets, and not freaking out at all. And they decided to try and see if they could save him instead of putting him down. The owner of a local shelter happened to be there when I was and offered to go halfsies with the vet's cost to try and save him. Since I couldn't even afford to put him down, they were gonna do that part for free. In the end, I was told never saw him in person again. The missing I was actually in there, but like sunken back, and that one they were able to save, and he got vision back. The other eye had to be removed. His jaw wasn't as badly messed up as it looked, and they were able to set it fairly easily, and with lots of pain medicine he was able to eat and drink by himself. They neutered him during the same surgery for the eye and jaw, and by some luck he had no other major injuries or internal damage. Leading theory is he got hit by a car. During recovery he got along with the other cats, played with both cats and humans, and was a well-behaved gentleman despite his checkered past. One of the vet employees adopted him, and he found a forever home. I had a similar experience. Just recently, one of the feralish cats in our neighborhood had one of her legs run over. My neighbor saw it happen, and she wasn't sure it had been run over and hurt, so she didn't say anything about it. She called me a week later. She always calls me when one is hurt or sick because she knows I'll take it, and told me that it was in fact hurt and for me to come see. Basically her back leg was crushed, and during that week she had been trying to chew it off. I called the local shelter. The neighbors were going to have her put down and explained the situation, and that she was very young, and asked if there was anything they could do. They told me to catch her and bring her to them. I snuck up on her while she was eating and put a blanket over her to keep her, and picked her up as quickly and gently as I could. I got her in the kennel and brought her to the shelter. They got her to a vet, and she had to amputate the leg completely. I brought her home 3 days later, intending to keep her inside at least until she was fully recovered. She still lives with me, and is the sweetest, most affectionate cat. Her name is Maggie. I think animals like this know that without our help, they would have been so much worse off, and it changes them. Before this happened, you couldn't even act like you were going to get close to her without her taking off. She is a totally different cat now, and I'm so happy knowing that she sleeps in my bed at night and doesn't have to deal with heat or cold. She always has food and fresh water. She is loved so much, and she never has to worry about sleeping on the streets, scavenging for food, having litter after litter of unwanted kittens, or of meeting a miserable end to what would most likely be a much shorter life if she lived on the street. One of the more surreal moments in my life watching a deer cross in front of my car and get struck by a minivan doing 70 in the opposite lane. The van driver didn't see it coming somehow, and the deer got catapulted at least 20 feet in the air. I watched this pinwheeling deer fly through the air for seconds before it landed. My buddy and I both looked at each other and started laughing. It was an unexplainable emotion. We circled back and the van driver was fine. The deer was dead and looked totally untouched, save maybe a tablespoon of blood leaking out of its mouth. Again, we just stared at that deer and started laughing uncomfortably. When I was in 8th grade, there was a girl in my class who was being severely abused by her family in about every way imaginable. Her locker was right next to mine, so I talked to her more than most of the other kids in our class. One day, she told me she stabbed herself in the foot, and I was so freaked out that I told my mom, who worked for the school and was a mandated reporter. She left our school after that because she was finally removed and put in a group home. She also had special needs, fetal alcohol syndrome, and needed extra support. At the time, I didn't realize that she had probably done that on purpose because I was so sheltered and the whole seriousness of the situation just went entirely over my head. I was mostly concerned that her foot was going to be infected. Years later, I found out that in addition to not being fed or bathed, her older brothers were violently raping her and her younger sister. Makes me sick to think about still. I worked in a group home for kiddos with severe psychiatric illnesses for a while. Most of our clients were abuse victims, and we had a beautiful little blonde girl who had been wally assaulted repeatedly and severely by an uncle. We were only supposed to keep kids for 6 months or so, but we had that little one for years. The system was hellbent on reunifying this little one with her family, so she started going on weekend passes back home to grandma's house. When she would return, she would mention that her uncle or perpetrator was there. I just remember we all wrote letters to the judge, reporting that and saying we didn't think she needed to go back. And by we I'm talking several clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, and facility staff. Judge sent her home anyway. Uncle raped her again almost immediately, and she set herself on fire to keep him from touching her. Within a week of leaving our facility, she was in a burn unit in St. Louis. This was 10 to 15 years ago. I saw a lot of awful stuff working that job, but that situation is what made me say, I can't do this anymore. I was so heartbroken that the system failed her, and that was with everyone knowing, with her getting removed from the home, getting intensive treatment, and for what? I don't know if it's the same little person you were talking about, but the fact there might be more kids in a situation where literally setting yourself on fire is a better alternative than horrific abuse is even more depressing.